Nina sat at her desk, fingers poised over the keyboard, though her thoughts drifted like smoke. The low hum of the office surrounded her, phones ringing, heels tapping across marble floors, voices murmuring behind closed doors. She'd come to know the rhythm of this place as well as the beat of her own heart. Predictable, controlled, safe. That's how she liked it now. At 28, Nina had learned the hard way that passion was rarely worth the wreckage it left behind. Her last relationship had been a quiet disaster, 2 years of slow unraveling that ended with a slammed door and too many unanswered questions. Since then, she'd built her life back with careful, steady hands. Early mornings, late nights, no distractions. Her world was small, but it was hers, and then there was Sasha. Nina's boss was sharp in a way that demanded attention, tailored suits, calculated smiles, and a voice that could disarm or destroy depending on her mood. But Sasha had always treated her fairly, kindly even. There was a respect there, unspoken but mutual. Still, lines were clear. Sasha was boss, Nina was assistant. Nothing more. So when Sasha called her into her office that Friday morning, Nina expected another briefing or task. Instead, Sasha offered something unexpected. "You've been working hard," she said, leaning back in her chair with that practiced calm. "Why don't you come to the gathering this weekend? Just something small at my place. A few team members, food, drinks. My family will be there too." Nina blinked. "Your family?" Sasha smiled. "Yes. My mother, actually. She's particular, but I think she'd like you." There was a pause, long enough to notice, short enough to ignore. Nina gave a small nod. "Okay, I'll come." As she returned to her desk, something curled in her chest. Not anxiety exactly, but something close. She rarely stepped outside the boundaries she'd so carefully drawn, and Sasha's world, her real world, was not a place Nina had ever been, invited before. Still, part of her was curious about the gathering, about the mysterious mother Sasha rarely mentioned, about why, suddenly, she was being brought a little closer to the fire. Nina didn't know it yet, but this quiet invitation would be the first step into something far more complicated than she'd ever imagined. The late afternoon sun spilled gold over the back garden, painting the manicured lawn and tall glass windows in a soft, dreamlike hue. Laughter floated from the patio as a few coworkers mingled with drinks in hand, their voices blending with the faint jazz playing through the outdoor speakers. Nina stood to the side, quietly sipping from a glass of white wine, trying not to feel out of place. Then she saw her Elena. She didn't have to ask who she was. Something about the woman announced herself before anyone did. Mid-50s, tall and composed, with silver at her temples and sharp eyes that softened only when she smiled. She walked like she belonged everywhere. And when Sasha moved toward her for a kiss on the cheek, Nina felt the confirmation settle in her chest. That's her mother. When their eyes met, Elena's gaze didn't waver. In fact, it held. Too long. Just enough to make Nina feel the stir of something. Interest, uncertainty, the faint flicker of unease. Elena tilted her head and smiled, crossing the space between them with the kind of elegance that made Nina's breath catch. "You must be Nina," she said, voice smooth, low, a little amused, as if she already knew her. "I am," Nina replied, offering her hand. Elena took it, but instead of a polite shake, she rested her hand lightly over Nina's for a moment longer than necessary. "I've heard quite a bit about you. Sasha says you're the only one she trusts to keep her from going completely mad." Nina let out a soft laugh, surprised. "She's never said that to me." Elena leaned in slightly, her perfume subtle and intoxicating. "She wouldn't. My daughter is many things, but generous with her emotions isn't one of them." There was something effortless about the way Elena asked questions. About Nina's job, her art degree she'd once abandoned, her favorite books, her reasons for moving to the city. She wasn't prying exactly. It was more like being gently unwrapped. Nina answered despite herself, lulled by Elena's curiosity, her ease. And yet, beneath the warm surface of their conversation, a quiet tension grew. Nina felt it like static in the air. The way Elena's eyes would linger just a second longer than expected. The way she tilted her head when Nina spoke, as if memorizing her. She wasn't just listening. She was studying her. Later that night, after the crowd had thinned and the city sky had faded into a dark velvet scattered with stars, Nina found herself alone on the patio. She was about to leave when Elena appeared again, a glass in each hand. "You looked like you needed company," Elena said, offering her a glass of red. "I did," Nina admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. They sat side by side on the wicker love seat, close enough to share warmth. The night air had turned cool, and a hush had settled over the house. For a while, neither spoke. Then Elena turned toward her, eyes searching Nina's face in that way again, like she saw something buried beneath skin in silence. "You're beautiful," she said suddenly, in a quiet way, like a story someone keeps to themselves. Nina's heart stuttered. She looked down, flustered, unsure how to respond. And then, with a tenderness that made Nina forget how to breathe, Elena reached out and brushed a loose strand of hair behind her ear. The touch was brief, but everything changed. Elena began appearing at the office with increasing frequency. Not enough to raise suspicion, but enough that Nina started to notice a pattern. She would arrive mid-morning with coffee for Sasha, exchange pleasantries with the staff, linger by Nina's desk a little too long. Always smiling, always graceful. On the surface, it looked casual, even charming. But Nina could feel the pull, quiet and persistent, threading its way through every encounter. Sometimes, Elena would wait until Sasha was in a meeting, then drift toward Nina like it was a coincidence. They would talk. Nothing scandalous, nothing overt, but it was always intimate. A softness in the way Elena said her name. A curious tilt of her head when Nina mentioned something she loved, as if every detail mattered. Then came the first invitation, a quiet gallery on a Wednesday afternoon. Elena texted her the location, no context, just, "Come if you can. I'd like to share something." Nina went. From there, it became a rhythm, hidden in plain sight. A coffee shop tucked in the corner of the old town, a park bench overlooking the river, the back table of a small bookshop cafe. Every meeting felt like stepping into another world, one that belonged to them alone. They talked about art, music, regrets. Elena revealed little pieces of herself, her late husband, her empty house, her quiet mornings filled with silence and tea. Nina listened, heart aching with an emotion she couldn't name. But with every meeting, the confusion grew. She was Sasha's mother. Sasha, who had given her a job, who trusted her, who called her reliable. This wasn't just forbidden, it was a betrayal in slow motion, and yet... Nina couldn't stop. She would replay Elena's words at night, imagine the way her hand had brushed hers at the cafe counter, how her eyes lingered when Nina laughed. It became a secret thrill, edged with danger, and wrapped in silk. One afternoon, during a walk, through the botanical gardens, Elena paused near a fountain and reached for Nina's hand. She held it gently, her thumb tracing over Nina's knuckles like she was memorizing them. The world faded around them. Birds chirped, leaves rustled in the breeze, but none of it reached Nina's ears. "I get lonely sometimes," Elena said, her voice low, almost fragile. "There's this ache. It stays with you, even in a room full of people." Nina swallowed, heart pounding. She didn't pull away. Elena looked at her then, eyes searching, not asking for permission, but offering something raw. "When I'm with you, it doesn't hurt as much." That moment settled between them like snowfall. Soft, quiet, irreversible. And, though neither of them said a word more about it, Nina felt it shift. Something invisible tipping forward. They had crossed a line. Not with their bodies, but with their hearts. It was one of those rainy afternoons when the world seemed to retreat, muffled by the steady patter of droplets against the windows. The kind of day that invited introspection and stillness. Elena's voice came through the phone, soft and inviting, as if she already knew Nina would say yes. "I'm alone today," Elena said, the words almost too casual. "Could you come by? I could use some company." Nina hesitated, her heart beating faster than it should have. But there was something in Elena's tone, a quiet vulnerability, that made it impossible to say no. When she arrived, Elena greeted her at the door, a soft smile on her lips. The warmth of the house embraced her, the scent of candles and fresh rain mingling in the air. Elena led her to the living room, where the lights were dimmed, and the only illumination came from the flickering candles scattered across the room. It was intimate, almost sacred in its stillness. They sat close on the couch, a space between them that felt too small. Nina could feel the warmth radiating from Elena's body, her presence like an invisible force pulling at her. They talked, soft words tumbling out, conversations about nothing and everything at once. But the words didn't matter. Not when Elena's hand brushed Nina's accidentally, or when her gaze lingered too long on Nina's lips. It felt as if the air between them had thickened, holding them in this shared space of longing and quiet tension. "I don't know what this is," Nina confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. She shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting to the door, then back to Elena. "I feel something when I'm with you, but it's wrong. I shouldn't." Elena didn't respond at first. She simply moved closer, her presence a quiet, undeniable pull. Then, without a word, she cupped Nina's face gently, her fingers warm against her skin. Her thumb brushed across Nina's lips, as if testing the boundaries of the air between them. And then, Elena kissed her. It was soft at first, tentative, an exploration of something unspoken. But it deepened quickly, the kiss turning urgent, a rush of heat that sent a jolt through Nina's body. It was everything. It was electric. It was wrong and beautiful all at once. Elena's lips were soft, tasting of wine and the lingering warmth of the room. Nina could feel the desperation in the way Elena's hand slid to her neck, holding her there, anchoring her to the moment. When they finally pulled away, Nina's breath came in shaky gasps. She stared at Elena, her heart racing, her thoughts a blur. Without a word, she stood, scrambling for her coat. The rain was still falling, and it felt like the only thing that could drown out the chaos in her head. She stumbled out the door, her feet slipping in the wet grass. but she didn't care. Her heart thudded painfully in her chest. The memory of that kiss branding itself into her skin. And as she walked away, the world around her felt as if it had shifted irrevocably. The line had been crossed. There was no going back now. For days after the kiss, Nina tried to drown the memories, to bury them deep inside the busy rhythm of her work and the endless tasks Sasha handed her. But no matter how hard she tried, Elena's presence lingered in her mind. Her touch, her some scent. The heat of that kiss that had ignited something inside of Nina that she couldn't extinguish. She began avoiding Elena. At first, it was small things. Shifting her schedule so their paths wouldn't cross at the office, taking longer to run errands so she wouldn't be in the same place when Elena visited. She buried herself in her work, the never-ending emails and reports, anything to keep her mind busy, her hands occupied. But it didn't work. Elena's gaze haunted her in every empty moment. The pull, the longing, was still there, stronger than before, weaving its way into her every thought. Nina stopped sleeping, her nights filled with restless tossing and turning, flashes of Elena's face, her hands, that kiss. She couldn't escape it. And the guilt, it gnawed at her, turning her stomach, twisting her heart into tight, painful knots. What had she done? What was she doing? Sasha was her boss, her friend, and she had betrayed that trust in a way that was unforgivable. But the desire, the ache, to be close to Elena again, to feel her touch, was too overwhelming. Every time Nina closed her eyes, she saw Elena's face, and every time she opened them, her heart raced with longing. Sasha noticed the change in Nina, the tension that had crept into her once steady demeanor. She wasn't as quick to smile anymore, her movements stiff, distracted. At first, Sasha didn't say anything, but it didn't take long for her to corner Nina in the hallway one afternoon. "What's going on with you?" Sasha's voice was tight, but it wasn't anger. It was concern. "You've been off. You're not yourself." Nina tried to brush it off, offering a weak smile, but Sasha wasn't fooled. "It's nothing," she said, voice quieter than she intended. "Just tired." Sasha didn't push it. Not yet. But Nina could see the shadow of suspicion in her eyes, and that made the guilt deepen, the weight of it pressing on her chest. A few days later, Nina returned home to find a letter, waiting for her. It was handwritten. Elena's elegant looping script across the front of the envelope, the paper thick and personal. Her heart stumbled in her chest as she held it, as if the letter itself could tell her the truth of what had happened. With trembling hands, she tore it open and began to read. "Nina, I can't stop thinking about what happened. I don't want you to run from this, from me. I know it's wrong, and I don't know why I'm asking this, but I don't want to pretend it didn't happen. I want you. Please don't pull away from me now. Let me show you. Let me show you what this could be, even for just a moment. Elena." Her heart pounded in her ears. She felt the weight of Elena's words, raw and desperate, each one a thread pulling her closer to something she feared, but also craved. Nina stared at the paper for what felt like an eternity, the words blurry as her eyes filled with tears. She couldn't escape it. She couldn't stop thinking about Elena, about the ache that had taken root in her chest. She went to Elena's house the next evening. The door was open, a soft light spilling out, and when Elena saw her standing there, she didn't say anything. She just stepped aside, letting Nina in, the air between them charged with unspoken things. They didn't speak at first. They didn't need to. Their bodies knew the language they hadn't yet said aloud. When they finally came together, it was like everything inside Nina unraveled, tenderness and desperation woven together in a quiet storm. Elena kissed her with a kind of reverence, as though every touch was something sacred, and Nina couldn't pull away. Her hands roamed, trembling, as she memorized the feel of Elena's skin, the sound of her breath, the way her lips felt pressed to her neck. It was soft, but full of an ache that made Nina's chest tighten with something she couldn't name. But afterward, when they lay tangled together in the quiet of the room, Nina's heart shattered. She pressed her hands to her face, tears slipping through her fingers. What had she done? What had they done? She wasn't supposed to be here. This wasn't hers to take. She was stealing something sacred, something meant for someone else. The guilt crashed through her like a wave, and she couldn't breathe. Elena didn't say anything. She simply held Nina close, letting her cry. The silence between them was heavy, and Nina didn't know if it was the silence of regret or of something deeper, something unspoken but irrevocable. It happened on a Wednesday afternoon, a quiet lull in the office as the team worked through the usual piles of paperwork. Sasha had stepped out to take a call, leaving her phone on the desk as she went into the conference room. Elena's name flashed briefly across the screen when it pinged with a new message. A voice memo, a moment too intimate to ignore. The briefest of curiosity seized Sasha as she reached for the phone, pressing play before she could stop herself. Nina's name echoed through the speaker, soft and full of a tenderness that wasn't meant for public ears. The voice was hesitant at first, but then it deepened, growing more confident. Sasha's heart skipped as she listened to the words that followed. Words of longing, desire, words that belonged to her. The weight of it hit Sasha like a ton of bricks, and her hand trembled as the memo continued to play. It wasn't just a slip-up or a passing flirtation. It was raw, vulnerable. Elena's voice was so familiar now, woven through the fabric of her own memories. But this was a betrayal. The sound of her footsteps startled Sasha back into the present. She clicked off the phone and quickly stood, her chest tight. The room spun, but she couldn't bring herself to confront it just yet. Not until she'd calmed down, not until she knew what she was supposed to feel. But then Nina walked in, her eyes immediately locking with Sasha's. For a moment, the world stood still. She could see it in Nina's face, the sudden tension, the fear, the guilt. They stood in silence for a heartbeat, two worlds on the brink of collapse. Then Sasha spoke, her voice colder than she intended. But it was all she could manage. "You were with her," Sasha said quietly, as if saying it aloud would make it more real. Nina blinked, the words catching in her throat. "Sasha, I never..." You never meant?" Sasha interrupted, her voice shaking now, the storm of her emotions breaking through. "What did you think was going to happen? That you could just walk away from this without consequences?" "I didn't plan it, okay?" Nina's words came out in a rush, her face flushed with the weight of shame. "It wasn't supposed to happen. I didn't..." "But it did," Sasha cut in, her eyes burning with a hurt that Nina hadn't anticipated. "It did happen. You betrayed me." The words stung, each one slicing through Nina's heart. She took a step forward, but Sasha held up a hand, her face twisting in a mixture of confusion and rage. "Do you even understand what you've done? What she's done?" Nina opened her mouth to say something more, but no words came. Sasha turned away, her shoulders trembling, and with a final broken glance over her shoulder, she walked out of the room, leaving Nina standing alone. A few hours later, Elena appeared in the office. She found Sasha sitting at her desk, head buried in her hands, the weight of the betrayal evident in every inch of her posture. Elena hesitated, then crossed the room slowly, her voice low, almost pleading. "Sasha, please. Let's talk about this." We can— No. Sasha interrupted, sharply, her voice flat. There's nothing to talk about. But I didn't mean— You've broken everything. Sasha's voice cracked, and she looked up at Elena, her eyes filled with both pain and fury. How could you do this to me? How could you do this to us? The silence between them stretched long and painful, and for the first time, Sasha saw something she had never noticed before. Cracks in their relationship, deep and irreversible. Elena didn't know how to fix this, didn't know how to say the words that would make it right. And Sasha couldn't bring herself to care enough anymore to let it heal. Not after all of it. Not after the damage that had already been done. Nina's decision to leave came suddenly, as if a door had slammed shut in her face, and there was no other way forward. She handed in her resignation with no fanfare, no tearful goodbyes. It was just an email, simple, to the point, and she didn't look back as she packed up her things, her desk barren by the end of the afternoon. There was no relief in it, only the weight of a chapter closing, one that had been fraught with too much desire, too much guilt, and too many betrayals. She moved to a different part of the city, a quiet neighborhood where the noise of her old life couldn't follow her. Her new apartment was small, but it was hers, and the walls seemed to hold her secrets with an understanding that no one else could. Nina spent her days in solitude, working part-time as a freelancer, her nights consumed by restless sleep and thoughts she couldn't escape. She had severed ties, or so she thought, but every now and then, her phone would vibrate with a message from an unknown number, and she would open it, only to find Elena's name there, followed by a missed call. The first time, Nina had let it ring, her heart in her throat. But after that, the calls stopped, the silence descending on her like a heavy fog, but in a way that felt respectful. Neither of them knew how to break it. There was nothing left to say, nothing that could undo what had happened. The months dragged on, each one filled with the mundane rhythm of a life that had been irrevocably altered. The memory of Elena's touch, her voice, the way she made Nina feel, stayed with her like an old, comforting ache. But she had learned to live with it, or at least to pretend she was. It was a crisp autumn afternoon when Nina saw Sasha. She was standing across the street, laughing with a colleague, her features sharper, colder than Nina remembered. There was no trace of the warmth in her eyes that Nina had once known so well. Elena stood beside her, just a step behind, her presence, an unspoken part of the picture. They didn't speak, they just stood there. A fractured picture of everything Nina had once believed in. Nina stood still, watching them from the other side of the street, her heart a twisted knot of longing and regret. It was painful, the way Sasha had changed. The way Elena had too. They were no longer the people Nina had known. Or perhaps it was Nina who had changed. Too much, too quickly, and irreparably. That night she sat at her small kitchen table, the words falling onto the page before she could stop them. She wrote a letter she knew she would never send. "You made me feel real again. I'm sorry for loving you." She stared at the words, her heart aching with the weight of them. She wanted to send it, wanted to somehow make it right. But she knew there was no making it right. The love she had felt was now nothing more than a memory, one that could never be reclaimed, never be fixed. It had been beautiful once, but it was gone, lost to the spaces between their mistakes. Nina folded the letter carefully and placed it in the drawer. It was her last goodbye to something that could never be. She had let it go. Nina found herself sitting alone in the park, a quiet space she hadn't visited in months. The path she walked on was familiar, worn smooth by countless footsteps, some of which were hers, others belonging to Elena. They had spent so many afternoons, here, strolling under the shade of the trees, exchanging soft words and stolen moments, their laughter mingling with the sounds of the city in the distance. It had been a time of possibility, of something pure and fragile, a fleeting connection that had burned bright and then faded away. Now, the park was still, the air crisp with the changing season. The leaves rustled gently above her, a soft whisper of nature reminding her of how much time had passed. She watched a mother and daughter nearby, their laughter ringing through the air like music, and for a moment, Nina felt a pang in her chest. The love between them was simple, uncomplicated, a shared joy that made the world feel lighter. She thought about the love she had shared with Elena, about the way it had felt like the world had narrowed to just the two of them, even when they were surrounded by so many others. But love, Nina realized, wasn't always meant to last. Some loves were brief, intense, and transformative, meant to leave a mark on the soul and then drift away. She could feel the echo of that love still, like a distant melody that played in the background of her life, even if Elena was no longer a part of it. She could never forget the way Elena had made her feel, alive, seen, cherished. But she also knew that some things were not meant to be forever, and that was okay. As a breeze picked up, a faint scent reached her, soft, floral, and unmistakable. Elena's perfume, delicate and familiar, seemed to surround her. It wasn't Elena, of course. She was long gone from this place, just another part of Nina's past. But the memory of her lingered, a ghost that wouldn't let go. Nina smiled, faintly, a bittersweet understanding settling over her. Some loves are not meant to last. She whispered the words to the wind, as if offering a final quiet farewell. "Thank you," she murmured softly, letting the wind carry the words away, and, in that moment, she let go, feeling the weight of the past lift from her shoulders as she embraced the quiet peace of moving forward. Love, I've come to realize, isn't always loud. It's not just passion, or grand gestures, or even the comfort of routine. Sometimes it's quieter, measured in the way someone listens when you're tired, the way they make space for your fears, even the ones you haven't spoken aloud. But love, too, can wither in silence. I look at Aaron now and see the outline of the man I married, still gentle, still reliable. But the thread that used to tether us tightly together has frayed. I don't know when it happened, only that it did. One day we were laughing over spilled wine and burnt toast, and now we barely know how to finish each other's sentences. I haven't left. Not yet. There are mornings when I still wake up hoping it will feel different. That he'll roll over, look at me like he used to, and say something that reaches the part of me that still believes in us. And there are nights when I wonder if I'm just too afraid to leave, clinging to the shape of a life that doesn't quite fit anymore. He still says he loves me. I say it back. But the words hang there, suspended in a space between doubt and duty. I think we both hear the hollowness in them now. At work, I pass Celeste in the hallway, and she nods politely, like nothing ever happened. Like she didn't tear a hole in the center of my life and call it a coincidence. I smile back, even as something inside me folds inward. I keep going. That's what we do, isn't it? We keep going, even when it hurts, even when we no longer know what we're moving toward. Sometimes, I wonder what I'm really waiting for. An apology? A moment of clarity? Or just enough courage to choose something else? I don't have answers. Not yet. Maybe I never will. But I know this. Love should never make you feel small. It should never ask you to shrink or stay silent to keep the peace. It should never leave you questioning your worth, or wondering if you're easy to replace. And if it ever does, then maybe the bravest thing you can do is admit it. So I ask you, whoever you are reading this, what would you do if love started sounding like silence?